And roll. Anyway, why didn't they all move down take a couple of months and walk down to San Diego? We're at 73 degrees.
Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay. 5.
Welcome, welcome very, very much to Conversation. I'm happy to have framed in the picture now the visage of Abraham Weisfeld, a Ph.D., and over my right shoulder, as it appears on the screen here, and over my left shoulder is a picture of Muammar Gaddafi with all kinds of medals. It's a beautiful picture. I see you're living in very good condition up there in Montreal, and welcome, Abraham, to the program. It's a great pleasure we've been able to put this together.
Thank you very much, Harold Channer. This is a Palestine boutique that I started here in my apartment.
Yes, indeed. You've sent me some wonderful footage about that, and we're going to talk some about that, and we're going to be talking today. Among the things that I'm really looking forward to us becoming good friends, and I'm thinking the things you've sent to me, one of which was a film that's been put out, and we're going to show a clip of it, maybe 10 minutes or something like that, with people saying that it may be a resurrection of the Gaddafi influence, as it were, on North Africa, and particularly in the country of Libya, by his son Saif, and that he's emerging now. I guess he's just coming up about 50 years old or something, and that was very reassuring to me, and we're going to show a clip about that, and then we're going to talk further with your work you've done in terms of the West Bank and Palestine, for a second clip of a program here. So just to give the audience knowing that that's the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you to Conversations.
Very well.
Now, young man, share a little bit of your background, born and raised, a little bit your personal background, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll get down and talk about the human condition, okay?
Yes,
born
I come
and raised.
From a refugee family. My parents were Jewish refugees from Poland who escaped into the old Soviet Union, Russia, from Warsaw and the Polish city of Lublin. And each of my parents were very strong-minded individuals who actually came back into their respective ghettos and brought out a younger sister and a younger brother each. And so 4 members of my 2 parents' families survived out of about 300 and 400 people. The generalized extermination of the Polish Jewish community.
Absolute horror. Absolute horror.
Regime,
horror beyond cognition or understanding. Anyway, terribly sorry about the loss in your family, and happy that you've been able to survive that and to prosper as a scholar. Congratulations, you're now a Ph.D., as I understand.
Yes, Ph.D., yes, in political science from the Université du Québec à Montréal, in the French Québécois University here.
What did you do your thesis on, if I could?
On critique of Zionism, beginning with a critique of the nation-state as proposed by the German philosopher Hegel.
Now, a critique of Zionism, and you're of a Jewish background.
Yes.
Do you have much company in the Jewish community outside of, let's say, our brothers in the Torah Karta and some others of a, Orthodox religious thing, asking the question, so where's the Messiah, or where's the Mashiach, some would be saying. But outside of that, it's a pretty unusual, or what is it, among intellectuals, I guess it is, among the Jewish community, being critical of, in any kind of way, of the state of Israel. Do you get back talk or
Yes.
You understand what I'm trying to say, yeah.
But, we're going to be talking about Libya, so just briefly, I want to say that I come from a leftist background because my mother was a Bundist, Jewish Bundist from Warsaw, which was a Jewish anti-Zionist organization since 1897, since the founding of Zionism. And, and the Torah Karta is another, principled, Jewish tendency, which is against the Zionist regime as well. So I respect Natura Carta for that reason in particular. And so I come from my mother's influence of a Jewish socialist background, and that's why I found, the Jamahiriya in Libya with the 1969 revolution initiated by Gaddafi to be so interesting. And that's why I went there to speak about Palestine in 1976 in Tripoli at a conference there.
Yeah. So, you were of that sentiment firmly, even early and so forth. And did you find many in the Jewish community, let's say writ large, not only in the Torah culture but writ large, many
Yes.
who have a support for the Palestinian people, or what is
Yes.
what is the
There's-
reading of the Jewish community feeling in your broad brush understanding of the Jewish community about the situation in the West Bank and about the Palestinian issue?
Well, while the Jewish Israeli population is split about evenly
Is
between
it?
those who are in favor of or against the occupation of the West Bank, amongst the Jewish Americans, there's a large majority who are opposed to the occupation of the West Bank and are, in effect, supporting the recognition of a Palestine state there.
Excuse me,
which
you
would
said
be
a large majority of the
majority,
Jewish.
like 64% of the Jewish Americans oppose the occupation. Yes.
Is that a root to fact? They do it firmly and so forth, and
Yes. And there are many Jewish organizations now that are actively opposing the continuing occupation of the Palestinian territories.
among the Jewish people that do support it or have a right-wing idea toward that, are they adherents to a particular leadership element within the Jewish community, or the intellectual leadership of understanding the human condition, or the march of history, or something? Or how is it that there are some who support it so avidly, and yet you say that great number of people who don't support the establishment of what's supposed to be their homeland? It's pretty divisive material to try and get a sense of identity around. Yeah.
Yes, the Jewish community is very polarized, very polarized. And Jewish Americans are raised in a liberal democracy, and they support equal rights. In particular, they supported the civil rights movement. And so naturally, the large majority of the Jewish Americans support the civil rights of the Palestinians as well.
Well, that so we're treading on, and you're of that tradition and so forth, and then you're liberally inclined. I think I've also said economically you have read and had some understanding of Karl Marx and his view, or of the communist take upon the human condition as one that, and socialist perhaps you might even say, or communist view of the human condition as something that ought to be considered by humanity writ large, or interesting?
No, I don't accept the communist paradigm. I was raised in the socialist tradition of the Jewish Bund. Now, the
Okay.
difference between socialism and communism is that communist regime did not recognize the national minorities, like the Jewish Russians, for instance. And whereas the Jewish Bund socialist movement called for national cultural autonomy. But in any case, we're supposed to be talking about Libya now.
Yes, all right. By all means, that's a great pleasure to talk about Libya. I've been over there maybe a dozen, 15 times, and did do a program with Muammar Gaddafi at CERT one time, and had a lot of friends that were there. And I was greatly inspired by him, and greatly disillusioned by what happened in that country, even at the behest of the leadership of my country, the United States of America.
Yes.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yes, it was a very good interview you did with Gaddafi. I watched it twice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was quite a situation. Yeah.
I was fortunate to meet Gaddafi in 1996. It was, I believe. Yes, I've been to Tripoli, 1976, 1986, when you were there as well.
Yeah.
In 1996 and 2006.
Yeah, I was. Were you? You were there in '86 when the bombing of the house and the killing of his adopted daughter Hannah took place. They had to fly the aircraft from Britain and go around the Straits of Hercules or through the Strait, Gibraltar, in order because they couldn't get air rights to make the flying. So it would indicate there were a great number of people who would have taken exception to the United States launching that attack, don't you think?
Yes, it was a terrorist attack, an attempted assassination of Gaddafi, obviously.
Well, what do you think the attitude of the American population, or let's say the North American, include Canada and so forth, is toward the socialist notion or the leftist notion or the idea in general that there ought to be more attention by the world leadership, geopolitical or in economic theorizing or in policy questions, toward what is usually termed the least among us, rather than just cottoning onto and supporting the powerful elements that are able to gain support over the means of production and great personal wealth for a few at the expense of the masses, as a pattern that seems to be characteristic of the history of the species from Caesar on down through the dynastic families of the of the Europe right down to the present.
Yes. Well, the leftist milieu in North America was very appreciative and knew a great deal about the liberation movements in Central and South America.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Mainly because these were compatible Christian political cultures, and there was even the Christian liberation theology movement that was well received, by the leftists of North America.
Yeah.
But the Muslim liberation movements in the Islamic political culture was not known about and was not appreciated in the past. However, that is changing now, and there is a great deal of attention being paid to the currents, the progressive currents amongst the Arab and Muslim countries of the world.
Do you think it's well enough understood by the world in general, in one sense, or even by the people of the Muslim world, or particularly in the world in general, that you have countries like Saudi Arabia where women aren't able to drive, and there are all kinds of things that didn't have a whole heck of a lot to do with understanding the modern situation and the need to have liberation for a lot of people who had been oppressed over the longer haul.
Well, actually, women have just been granted the right to drive in Saudi Arabia.
It's about time. Yeah, but it's sort of been like that for 100 years, and it's getting it's a little bit late coming to the party, I would say, in terms of that broad half of humanity. It would seem to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in political method, in terms of historical methodology,
yes,
they're called uneven and combined development. Even a society that is very underdeveloped can suddenly leap forward into a advanced technological society because there is no need to go through any of the intermediate stages like the like Britain or the United States have done. In Palestine, for instance, even though it is a very undeveloped society there in the West Bank, in Nablus, where I live half the year, everybody has a cell phone, and everybody's on Facebook, So there is an example of combined development. So these societies can jump forward very quickly.
And that's characteristic of this era, this historical era that we were born into and are part of the senior contingent at the moment, you and I, for instance, and the youth coming along seems to be having harbingers of a period of qualitative rather than just quantitative transformation.
Exactly.
You think that is true? Have there been other eras in history that you could you could associate with the time in which you and I were born and have become mature?
Yes. So, two great historical examples of qualitative leap forwards in historical development are the Russian Revolution, which went from feudalism to a form of communism immediately, and China, which also went from a rural feudal population to a continuing, socialist economy and society, which has made great compromises with capitalism, but has still retained the power, the control over the economy, in spite of the large transnational corporations that have moved into the place.
Yeah, right, like that. James Joyce, he's a pretty good writer, you know. He said, a quote I often do with people, you know, because I've been at university and that kind of thing. He has Daedalus say, history is a nightmare of injustice from which we're attempting to awaken. I always quote that or not. And also, is there repairing to cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary connection between the members of the intellectual community, like from the scientists and the geneticists and the historians and the political. They're getting down to where the dividing and conquering of the intellectual process, which has been characteristic of a lot of what academia has encouraged, you know, divide and conquer is a way to do that. But there's getting to be a time where there can be some systems thinking about things in a very comprehensive way that has not been characteristic on a planetary scale of any other time in history. It would seem to me it's something qualitative or suggesting it's now not just quantitative or step by step. It's a qualitative transformation that you and I, for instance, of some advanced age, have a privilege to still be around to understand. But particularly for the youth, it's a time of qualitative transformation, maybe on into comparisons with the evolutionary process of, you know, of Eldridge and a punctuated equilibrium when the new appears in an evolutionary context. That seems to be the way this whole Megillah, including the universe out to the beginning of the Big Bang, has come about. You understand what I'm saying? It's not just a normal period, it's a qualitative new.
I've seen this called cross-fertilization and also interdisciplinary thought.
Yes, yeah, or comprehensiveness, yeah.
Yes. So, you know, Libya is a good example of how a society that was very underdeveloped and under a colonial regime until Italy was expelled, you know, from North Africa.
Yeah.
It jumped forward to become developing into a socialist society. Now, I first went there in 1976. I had to get through the embargo in order to get into Libya by way of Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
And it nonetheless survived the embargo and developed a high technological society. And satisfied the needs, all the elementary needs of the population were being met there in terms of housing, healthcare, everything was being met on a free basis. Now, let's do a critical appreciation of Libya. And I would point out that not everybody benefited from these social rights that were granted and that were guaranteed, you know, by the Green Book, you know, as a elementary, you know, necessity of any civilized society. And Gaddafi, you know, put forward, you know, the society must satisfy the needs of all of its citizens. But, you know, Libya was a very polarized society, and polarized between the two major municipalities of Tripoli and Benghazi. Now, Tripoli was very well taken care of, but Benghazi was in the hands of a lot of the opposition elements, and they didn't benefit from the Libyan economy as much as Tripoli did. And this created a further, you know, political polarization, which was manipulated by the international neo-colonial powers to actually bring about the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi himself, unfortunately.
Well, that's going through a lot of things that happened. It was that was a traditional way, divide and conquer. The British were pretty good at dividing and conquering people, and dividing them up, and then running, you know, rings around them, in there. But that they were able to make such a transformation, the Senussi in the east and so forth. I think that's something that was a traditional tribal thing. Also, they had been, I think they were just about the poorest people in the world. They were just about the poorest by, you measure, you know, gross domestic. When I was a young man, and even more foolish than I am now, I think I was more foolish then when I was 24 than I am now when I'm 82, but I'm not at all sure. I may have gained a little bit of wisdom and, and everything, but I was sort of busting out all over. I had a lot of energy and everything, and I went as a young man, hitchhiked all through Europe, and I was going to come back for summer, or for autumn at the university, and I said, no, I'm going to go and I'm going to hitchhike, and I hitchhiked all out through the Middle East and back and through to Africa and down into Libya and through Libya. I came through Libya in 1954. I think I almost walked across the whole of Libya, being really stupid. I mean, I was really dumb, like a young man can be, and everything. But I did that, but I got a feel for it. And it was really very different then, and it had been, and they hadn't had much of, they were very low on the totem pole of measuring by gross domestic product or anything of that. They're the poorest country in the world. And it went from that to being, what they did is they discovered some of the richest oil deposits that existed, and he was able to make a revolution he was 27, Mr. Gaddafi. In the image, you can't see it, Abraham, but on the image of me here in New York, over my left shoulder, is a picture of Muammar Gaddafi, and over my right shoulder is your visage. It really is. I think it's really a good image because I'm in the middle of that, and I'm very happy for that. But he made a qualitative transformation, and they had great deal of money came to them, and he made a revolution, a fundamental revolution, and he was able to set up what he called a Jamahiriya, and it's a state of the masses situation, and they had overwhelming wealth, and they spread it around. Everybody owned their own home. Everybody owned the farm that they farmed. Everybody had access to education. They had 6% literacy when Idris was forced out. He went to Turkey, and when Mr. Gaddafi made the coup, I think he was 27 years old. It's always young men that make those revolutions, it seems to me. I don't know what happens. Maybe you and I should be thinking about, let's get the old-timers brigade to go out and make a real honest-to-God revolution instead of just sitting around in the parlor talking about it. But anyway, he did that, and then he got great support among the people, and he made a real, and everybody owned their home. Everybody had access to education, health. Everything was done. He was a woman's liberationist by Arabic standards and so forth. In what had been a tribal country, he made a major revolution and was progressive, and was a place of great progressive thinking. And I think a great deal of the progressive community of the world recognized that. And what is it that happened, do you think, that caused the United States of America to lead and to champion an attack upon that country that so blatantly killed the man and created such terrible chaos as actually did occur? What was it? What were the forces that led to the downfall of such an example that was in liberation terms, or for the least among us and everything, including women's liberation and all the most progressive ideas that caused that country to be attacked by Western power like the United States of America, led by and gone along with and cheered on by the United States of America? How do you explain that?
Well,
what do you think of that summary of the history of the country and the leading role that Gaddafi provided in terms of an inspiration for a well-organized and just world order?
Well, let me first introduce myself, actually.
By all means.
I'm Dr. Abraham Weisfeld.
Yes, doctor, yes.
I've been an activist since the 60s, and I completed my Ph.D. at the Université du Québec, Montréal, here in political science, and did a critique of the the Western nation-state concept that was developed in Europe that led to so many catastrophes.
Thank you.
Wars and the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I was very interested in Libya.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you said about your travels there, because in '54, that was just after the liberation of Libya
Yeah.
from Italian colonialism and Italian fascism.
I
under
didn't even
Mussolini.
know it at the time. I was just wandering her through like fools rush in. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was just taking it in, you know.
Yes.
Youth
Well,
can be
it was
so
occupied.
innocent. Yeah.
It was a society that was occupied by Italy since 1911.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and Italy actually massacred one-third of the
Absolute
population.
concentration
There was
camps.
3
They
million
had-
Libyans, and 1 million Libyans were killed by the Italy's occupation.
Thank
of-
you. Thank you. Yes, concentration camps. The Nazis learned from the Italians down in Libya. Yeah.
Yeah, from Italy, yes. It wasn't all the Italians, of course. It was
Yeah.
Italy, Italy's regime,
Mussolini,
fascist
yeah.
regime that did this,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Now, what happened to overthrow the Jamahiriya, the society of the masses, or a collective society, as it's translated from Arabic, is that the benefits of the Green Revolution led by Gaddafi was not accorded to or felt by all of the citizens of Libya, unfortunately. Benghazi was left in the cold, and the Berber tribes were not recognized, for their own national culture, and they weren't allowed to use their own language, for instance.
The Berber, yeah.
Berber, yes.
Berber, is that the recognition? Berber? I thought it was Barber.
No.
Like the Barber of Seville. No? Is Berber? Is that correct? You're a scholar, and you got these things correct.
Berber, yes.
It's
Berber is
Berber.
the name of that culture, that political culture.
Yeah.
And
Rich
and
culture.
So that provided an opening for the foreign interests to come inside and manipulate the direction of the revolt of those sectors of the population that were not treated equally with the supporters of the Green Revolution in Tripoli, that were mainly situated and centered in Tripoli.
Yeah.
So because the Green Revolution did not provide benefits for all of the population of Libya equally, this is the fatal flaw that resulted in the downfall of the Libyan Revolution. It is said in history that those who make a revolution halfway dig their own grave.
That's it. Who said that? Who said that?
I don't know, but it's true.
Give me chapter and verse, would you? That's something I'd like to put into my litany of things I say.
Those who do only make a revolution halfway dig their own graves. And this is what happened to Gaddafi and to Saddam Hussein as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
A revolution has to be permanent in its effect. It has to continue. It has to give the benefits to all of the sectors of the society. And it has to hand over the population increasingly into the hands of the masses, and not maintained in a political elite which is more advanced in terms of their political education, perhaps. But the purpose of their revolution must be to educate all the rest of the population. Now, this was begun with amazing success and increasing the level of literacy in Libya to practically 100%.
Yes, from 6% in 1956 with Adras, when he was the literacy was about 6%. It went to 96% under Gaddafi, including the women. He was ahead on women's liberation and all these kind of issues.
Yes. Very good job there. But the political education and the political benefits and the economic benefits of the Green Revolution have to be distributed more equally amongst the population, and the other cultures within Libya, other than the urban elites, have to be recognized for their own language and their own cultural interests and their own economic interests.
Wow.
Now, even though some of those sectors of the population didn't support the Gaddafi leadership, they should still have been granted all of the benefits of the revolution so that they could have been educated to understand.
Well, they went to 98% literacy within a couple of decades. That's pretty fast development. It was pretty good. They were coming from such a 0 point. I think they ought to be given credit for reading, and how many. It seems to me the whole thing, particularly you're in political science and everything, it seems to me the idea of realpolitik, Haushofer or something like that, that the way it's been, at least it seems in a certain way of reading history, ever since the beginning cave, or whatever it is, realpolitik was the political system would be established by whoever had the biggest club could hit the other on the head and set themselves up as the ruler, have all the women, have all the advantages and everything for themselves, set up some coterie of people that would support them in a way against anybody else. And that was more or less the history of the world. It was the history of Rome. It was the history of the feudal states in Europe for 1,000 years after Rome. And it was only some glimmer of beginning to get real democracy as the technology began to make it possible for there to be better life for more and more people, largely through the technological development of being able to bring support effectively in the United States, and so by Thomas Jefferson. And I think that they made a big break with it was for 1,000 years after Rome. It was nothing but feudal order with a few people running everything, and the masses were more or less, as they remain by and large on a world scale, like feudal subjects or slaves on an estate where all the assets and the riches are held for the benefit of and to the further benefit of those who have the power to enforce it. Now, yes, that's a hardcore reading of political reality, and the idea that it's all, it can be, it's been a long grind. 200,000 years we've been here as a species, and it's been the pattern that we can see has been the sociological way society has been organized. So it probably doesn't change all overnight, all at once, at one time. Or what do you think of the realpolitik view of political power?
Yes, it is very difficult to transfer a society that was basically rooted in feudal regimes, But but Gaddafi did a very good job.
Yes, yes.
He didn't complete the job, and there were traits of feudalism which he himself succumbed to. And I'd like to mention this,
okay,
let us do a critical analysis
here.
Now, for instance, in 1972, Gaddafi announced that the old constitution of King Idris, who was overthrown in '69, was torn up. He tore it up in front of the public.
Well, it was pretty barbaric, really. It pretty was feudalistic and everything.
Yeah,
as
so
it happens,
traditional. He destroyed the monarchy by tearing apart the constitutional monarchy that existed prior to the revolution.
But how about the fact that it might have been well to be destroyed, because it was not anything like a democracy at all. 5% literacy.
Gaddafi needed to tear up the constitution of the old monarchy.
So did Jefferson have to do the same for the United States over the feudal? Sorry, go ahead.
And not only did he tear up the old monarchical constitution, he promised Libya that there would be a new constitution. However, he did not carry through on that promise.
The Green Book doesn't serve, huh? You don't think the Green Book serves as a model that was trying to be built?
The Green Book is a manifesto.
Do you like the Green Book and what it says?
That constitution has to be formed as it was recently in Tunisia next door by a constitutional assembly, which drafts up a constitution by consensus together with all the different factions. And they put together a constitution by consensus that was put to the population to be voted upon in a referendum. And it was adopted. And so Tunisia is living in peace now because of the constitutional assembly that was set up in the revolutionary process there, that was conducted by the Arab Spring, that was initiated by one single guy in Tunis who got fed up with being
the guy with a fruit stand, right? He had a fruit stand or something.
Yeah, a fruit stand.
And he said, enough of this already.
By a policewoman who insulted him so much that he actually killed himself. He committed suicide in public and initiated the whole revolutionary process of the Arab Spring, which was successful in Tunisia. Successful politically, although it hasn't touched the economic revolution yet. Now, if Libya had proceeded to a constituent assembly, then that would have saved the revolution.
Did you ever go to the people's conferences that they talked about? I went to a number of those people's conferences. They had local gatherings of people. It would be like a community gathering for people at a local level, and then they tried to have they called it people's conferences, and they had a number of those things where they had a chance to have a voice,
yes,
and so forth in Libya.
these
And
were
it
called
seemed to
people's
me,
congresses.
do you
These are the General People's Congresses, as
Yes.
outlined in the Green Book. Yes.
Yeah, I went to a number of those. It seemed to me the people did, and they would have a say, and they could drive it. Everybody had their own car, and everybody was taking care of it practically everybody. Do you think there were any outside forces that brought that revolution in Libya or inveigled that, and was not one of the powers that did it the economic capitalist powers of the United States of America?
It wasn't the U.S. that first intervened there.
Not first, but in a decisive way.
It was the
Particularly
England.
Hillary Clinton.
No, it was the United Kingdom that was supporting the terrorist opposition led by the Islamicist, Salafist, or what's called now the Islamic Caliphate type of forces, the Daesh, as it's called in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
They were the initial opposition in Libya that was seeking to assassinate Gaddafi.
Yeah.
And they were a violent terrorist organization supported by England. Then Gaddafi, in order to outmaneuver that opposition, made his own alliance with Tony Blair of England, and made a further compromise with the United States of America to give up some of its independence, and gave up some of its military potential as well.
Yeah.
In order to achieve that alliance. And this was supposed to ensure that Libya would not be invaded as the other countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria.
As you notice, they have been since forever. The West has been invading those countries and dividing and conquering and running roughshod over the world without a capability of having a world that was worthy of being consecrated in the principle that freedom for all and particularly economic justice, was something that was possible now, which it is now perhaps becoming in an evolutionary sense, but it's not been able to realize its full potential, like a gestation in a pregnancy for the planet, in a way.
Yes. Well, the West has been invading, the Orient, on a continual basis.
Yeah.
The West calls these
It's
invasions
called imperialism.
crusades.
Yeah.
These are the crusades.
Yeah,
There have been in
that.
history about 9-10 crusades, and now what we see currently is the 11th crusade.
Yeah. Well, listen, one of the reasons we put this together is you got in touch with me and made available to me, because we both were there in '86 when Britain came around the straits of, had to fly around Europe because they couldn't get air passage. Mr. Reagan came and bombed the bejesus out of Tripoli, killing Muammar Gaddafi's daughter. And you were there, and I was there about 3 or 4 days after that happened. Ramsey Clark was there, I think, the afternoon that it happened or something like that. He was always ahead of history's curve. He was a great loss. He just passed recently, and I'm very sorry to say that. But we were there, and I was there, and I remember there was a little cart, like in the field behind the house there. He had killed the daughter, bombed with the aircraft from Britain and the United States behind it. And there was up a little, like a cart, no, a wagon, a flatbed thing kind of thing, but that horses would pull. And up on it, there were some people talking and there were some floodlights, and there was chaos because they had been terribly attacked and so forth. And there was a young man there. His name was Saif, and I think he was 11 or 12 years old. And I remember that was the first son of Muammar Gaddafi, and he was up on the cart having some words to say about keep the faith kind of thing as a very, very young man and everything. And that's interesting because recently, after the event in Libya where he was killed, Mr. Gaddafi, he was arrested and so forth. But recently, you've put together, and we have a tape we want to show. It's about 10 minutes or something. We better get it in now. That Saif has been imprisoned and everything, but he's emerging as a possible political force in the country of Libya and could resurrect the advantages of the Jamahiriya possibly as the possible elected leader of that country, which was the thing. Do you think maybe this would be a good time to try and fit that little clip in if we can?
Yes, I was there. You're quite correct. It was Saif. His full name is Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi. And he was a teenager, a young teenager, and he stood up on this tractor and made an oration for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I was there.
Denouncing the bombardment of his family home.
Yeah, I was there. He was 12, I think, 12 years old, I think, at the time.
Yes.
But listen, the trouble, one of the tyrannies in television is the tyranny of time. And we're running close on time, and we've got it going to air, okay? And I think they're putting it up in the background. Let's let this clip run now. And if you can let it run and get rid of me, maybe, if you can. There you go. Sabra. Okay, so we get that, and maybe we can bring back the image of us if you can. That's a very interesting clip that they're saying that he may emerge, Saif may emerge as a leading figure that could recapture the spirit of his father and as a force. And I've read that as like a resurrection of something that was very, very the most important. I was more inspired by what he was able to do and his forward thinking and what he was trying to do than any other leader on the scene. And I'm talking about that beyond the normal view of like the capitalist and the communist and the left and the right and all the kind of imperial forces of Europe and the United States and so forth, and their ties to institutional changes that have been bringing modernism and so forth. But there is coming a new kind of thing in the world that's going to cause a condition which those assumptions that are still being used, and the assumptions are still in a world where the assets that are creating the wealth are still all owned by a tiny plutocratic class of people in all the political entities around the world. They're feathering their own nest, and the people are still more or less like serfs in a feudalist state, and it's the best we can do. And he's saying that he would be a model for something different and something really qualitatively different and liberating of the country of Libya on the example of the man who had been overthrown largely through the United States of American intervention, or the oil companies, the big banks, and people who could see utilizing him in that kind of way, using him that way. And what do you think? You think this is something that might come up? It could be over the next year or two that he might well emerge and recapture the spirit of that qualitative transformation that is moving not only Libya, but much of the Arab and much of the African, Arab, and world in general to something that is needed on a world scale and be an inspiration for the people who are looking for a real qualitative, not quantitative, little change here and there, but a qualitative change and understanding of the human situation, which is very dire and very much under threat, but also has a great possibility of bringing a qualitative new order to the world that is something that we were perhaps privileged to be born into, a qualitative, perhaps even liberating kind of moment in historical terms, which has never been, but is heralded in a pregnancy kind of way for the time ahead, to where some of the youth, such as them and others, might be able to realize a qualitative transformation, not just a quantitative little changes around the edges, which is more or less the lesson of history. What do you think? Maybe Libya could emerge.
I can add that
Please
the government in Tripoli, which is the government of national reconciliation, based upon the model of the Green Book, actually, has amnestized Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi. So he's no longer being charged with the accusations that he had previously been arrested for, when he was arrested and held in prison by the Zitin tribe in the Sahara there.
That's warlord stuff that always goes on.
Not warlords. This is a tribe. This
okay,
is a tribal,
a warlord, a war tribe.
Yeah. Them there. Yes, and
divide and conquer.
Gratefully, they didn't kill him. They didn't condemn him to death, as was initially the judgment, at the time.
Yeah.
Now, he is free.
Yeah.
He has declared that he is available to be a candidate for the presidency in the coming election of Libya.
And he has a base near Sabra. He has a base among the masses of Sabra. That's a place where he's got a gathering.
Yes, to evaluate the potential for Saif al-Islam to continue the revolution of the Green Revolution in Libya, we have to look at other factors.
Yes, sir.
In Benghazi, there is another government which is opposed to the government in Tripoli.
That's Senussi,
The government in Benghazi around the Senussi tribe is being supported by the General Haftar, he's called, who is in turn being supported by the CIA. Now, he has a military force, he has the financial backing, and they have a government in Benghazi which is contesting for the control of power over Libya. So there is a dangerous situation happening in Libya now, which is basically, a civil war. Now, whether the government in Tripoli can successfully bring about the resurgence of Libyan society independent of the external forces is the question. And is Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi able to do so? We have to evaluate. He doesn't have a military force. He doesn't have a political party which is supporting him. He doesn't have an organized political opposition which is supporting him yet. But I assume that this political opposition is being organized at this time. And we are part of that organization, in terms of the international support for the, resurrection of the Libyan revolutionary government of the National Reconciliation and the People's Congress, as it is exemplified by the government in Tripoli at this time.
Very good. I can recall, if you do American history, that we made a revolution here, that many of the crowned heads in Europe, those feudal lords that had gone 1,000 years after Rome, lording it over the peasants and so forth, were sort of upset with the fact that we had sort of won that war, and they came back and bombed the bejesus out of Washington in 1812, an act of repercussion against the fact that we had made a break with history. The same might be able to apply in North Africa, in Libya, against the assumption that the Angevin regime in place now, headed by the United States of America, one would suggest, is something that ought to be questioned and questioned mightily by the well-thinking and good-thinking people of the world, and might be able to take heart in that. And what do you think? There might be hope coming out of the example of the people that were overthrown by force of arms and realpolitik and the power base and the bankers and so forth that had an interest in that, and that there could be it could be a blow for a real qualitative change. Or do you think qualitative change will never come? We'll never have real universal justice. We'll only have justice for a few who can outwit the other or outdo the other or run away from the Gestapos or run away from the police forces or whatever. But we'll never have a real liberated order ever able to be applied to the people of this planet, which is the history would seem to apply. Or there may, on the other hand, be repair to systems that might be thinking about a qualitative, not a quantitative change, little change, a qualitative change, the way evolution works in terms of the new appearing like a pregnancy or the end of a pregnancy. And we're at a time qualitative liberation may be closer than we might have thought. It may be even time for a Moshiach to appear.
Well, Sayyid al-Islam al-Gaddafi could possibly bring about, the revolutionary liberation of Libya, but it is not guaranteed because there is a very strong opposition that is being supported by the CIA and General Haftar in particular. Now, for Sayyid al-Islam to be able to succeed, he has to be able to develop a program that will serve the interests of not only the elite in Tripoli, but it also has to address the concerns of Benghazi and the Berber tribes in Sahara. This wasn't done before. This has to be an advancement that Saif will bring to the revolution in Libya.
Well, that would be something.
I hope that he is can appreciate, the needs of doing so, because otherwise he could suffer the same fate as his father. It's not guaranteed that he will succeed.
Not at all. Most revolutionary people have been, you can see what they did with Jesus and what they did with Spartacus and with the powers that be, who had uppity people coming along and saying, let's have a little bit of justice for everybody, have not been treated well by the power elites all throughout human history. And maybe it wasn't possible, except in our time, that the technology is going so to where everybody might be able to begin to have a claim for being what is roughly called a have in materialistic terms. We have a capability of providing life support and a good standard of living for everybody that's unprecedented in the history, and it's moving exponentially. The ability to provide life support for a growing population of the world and the ecology, and a new order might be in hand on evolutionary terms. It's a little hard to get your mind around. We may live at a time of the end of time, or the end of the historical experience that has been the history of the planet, and we may become, we can take care of everybody, and we got weapons that now are able to be unleashed by the traditional way of geopolitics. And if they're unleashed, they're juggling these things. They got a capability of unleashing that weaponry that would mean, if it's unleashed, apparently from the modeling, it would be the end of our species. We couldn't do that. We've got this new power to destroy that we've never had in our ignorance to hold on to the old ways and so forth. But we also have an ability to take care of everybody that ought to be paid attention to, in the sense of what we've never been able to do. There always had to be winners and losers and so forth. And to agree, there probably would be that for a while. But to have an idea and a vision of qualitative transformation and emergence of real, across the board, liberation of the entire Homo sapiens species within a context including the environment and the creatures. And do you understand what I'm saying? It may be like a time like that we've been born into, even at the adult end of it, you and I, but for the youth coming up.
This is a turning point in history for sure. We're on the cusp of either satisfying the needs of all concerned, for all needs, or we can destroy ourselves. No.
We couldn't destroy. Abraham, we were not able to destroy ourselves anytime before about the year 1970. We would have. There would have been a few scraggling survivors, even then.
No.
Do you remember getting under your desk when the thing in Cuba was going on, the atomic weapons in Cuba? I was scared out of my wits. I had a sense of the god-awful capacity to destroy. That and nerve weapons and the weapons that are at the control of the people who hold control over the system.
Yes, I was a kid, in primary school, hiding under this school desk, at that time of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Me too. I was scared out of my wits, and I am now that we don't have vision of a way in which we're going to form capital and distribute buying power and distribute the system of social and economic organization that the future allows now in a way that it never has at the level of capability.
Now, my family has experienced the Holocaust, so I know that it's possible that humans can actually destroy themselves with the weapons that are available. Now, what is possible to bring about, a revolutionary change and get rid of all these nation states and their sovereignties which are fighting with each other, to have it over the other and become the world superpower as the United States under Trump seeks to do again. This can be overcome. And Libya, with Saif al-Islam, could actually bring about this world revolution.
And others might pop up
the continuation of the Arab Spring and bring about a revolutionary change in Saudi Arabia. And this could actually come about, with the success of a Saif al-Islam presidency.
Well, that might be part of a general awakening along the human society, but the question ought to be brought up once in a while by some systems thinking that is it time for a qualitative transformation? Do we have the capability of making a world safe and fair for everybody, or is that an impossible thing that never can be because everyone knows there's not nearly enough or never can be? There's always scarcity. For one to win, somebody else has to lose. All the old games that we've been playing, we got this far. But one of the things is, Abraham, we've run out of time for this segment where we're talking about Saif and Libya, and that's interesting. And I know you've got other work that you've been doing, like in Palestine and so forth. And we're going to do another program about that, so maybe we should, they're running the credit. So you know what that means. They're running the credit now. That's our producer, Josiane, there she is running the credits, and they're the ones who set the pattern, and so that means we're going to have to say goodbye. Shall we sing a goodbye lullaby or something like that? Good night, Irene. No?
So the conclusion is that we cannot predict what is going to be happening, but Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi could possibly bring about these changes that we have been talking about.
And it might be an example worth repairing
to his work.
Yeah, and it might be an example worth repairing to. And thank you for that clip. I think it ought to get wide distribution and other signs of a possible change. And so stay tuned. Tomorrow we'll have another program with you on another issue. Thank you and congratulations on your Ph.D. and so forth. The world's a much better place now that you're putting your work out on the world to be considered by that world. So thank you for viewing in the audience. We'll be coming back tomorrow if you can view on another program with this fine gentleman and scholar. And thank you very much for participating in this, Abraham, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Say good night, Abraham. Say good night. Good night. Say good night, Gracie. Say good night. Let's say good night.